How's it going, everyone? Divvy here with a new episode of the DarkspiderCast. A rather interesting one because I thought for a while it was going to be one of those slow weeks, one of those weeks where I was just trying to scrounge and go through because IGN, GameStop, not GameStop, but GameSpot. A lot of these places just, on websites, I was even checking Twitter just to kind of scrounge up enough material for me to talk about outside of the things that I've already been kind of consuming. Obviously, like I teased last week, I'm definitely going to be breaking down the finale for Obi-Wan to see if whether or not this show landed on either a bang or a whimper, or potentially a combination of the two, because I feel like that's a possibility, as well as my review for episode 3, and I've also seen some movies since then. I actually have two movies that I want to talk about briefly: Jurassic World Dominion and Lightyear. I guess in a matter of speaking, the summer movie season is kind of underway. It's still trotting along. We got a couple of more entries, one of which my girlfriend actually decided to cheat on me with, which full story in a little bit here, but we got quite a few movies kind of released here, and then we have a biggie. We have another Marvel Studios entry here in a matter of weeks. Actually, not even a matter of weeks. I think we were literally just talking about a week or so here, in the form of Thor: Love and Thunder. Tickets have already been purchased for Thursday night, or officially Thursday afternoon. Girlfriend requested the day off, so hopefully everything is set in order for us to check it out. But yeah, I got reviews for that. Also got a rather brief segment of what I've been playing, only because I only have one game to talk about, but it is a rather expansive game that also kind of leads me into a little bit of a thought, a little bit of a thing that I kind of want to extend to you guys, everybody that's listening here through either the podcast platforms or on the YouTube channel, as far as, am I the only one that kind of experiences this particular thing as a gamer? But we'll cross that road when we get there. And like I said, that was actually going to be the meat of the podcast. However, Nintendo decided to go ahead and bring us not only a Nintendo Mini, but an awful lot of other stuff has also kind of come down the pipeline. Now, there was a new Gotham Knights trailer. We'll not be talking about it here on the podcast because I actually went ahead and made a video reaction / breakdown of the new Robin character trailer for Gotham Knights. So if you guys want to check that out, the link in the description will take you to my YouTube channel, which should be one of the more recent videos, either the most recent or the second to most recent, and you'll find it there. So I won't be disclosing that on this podcast. However, I will be breaking down, like I said, my opinions on the Nintendo Direct Mini, which, judging by some of the highlights, some of the things that I've caught wind of before actually watching it from beginning to end, might be actually a little bit on the spicier side. It's not exactly on the same caliber as that State of Play from PlayStation a few weeks back, but it's actually a little bit more important than what we were led on to believe, because 25 minutes for a mini direct rather than a full-blown direct was just something that we looked at and said, that could wait. But it looks like this was actually significant enough to talk about. It actually had enough meat to chew on the bone. This, as well as also personally, I want to just briefly divulge on that gameplay slice, that gameplay deep dive for a Plague Tale Requiem that also boasted us finally a release date for Plague Tale Requiem. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about that. So that's pretty much all being held here in this upcoming episode of the DarkspiderCast. But first and foremost, like I said, I was under the impression that it was going to be a slow week, because over the weekend, I know the weekends are generally slow when it comes to gaming and movie news, but we were still going along on Monday, even a little bit of Tuesday, before the direct kind of reached to me, that I was just going through all my social media platforms. I was going to Twitter, through IGN, all that stuff, just to kind of see exactly if there was anything to really talk about. And the week was, for the most part, slow. So slow, in fact, that one of my topics here, at least for the intro, was going to be just my firsthand experience of finally having to pretty much bite the bullet and install Windows 11. Windows 11 is finally in my computer. I was procrastinating an awful lot, not because I don't know. I knew that Windows 11 by itself wasn't going to be like a bad thing. I knew it wasn't. It got like pretty decent reviews as far as people's impressions of how they messed around with the UI, messed around with the system. A lot of people just looked at it and said, it's not bad. It's not the worst iteration of Windows OS, but it's not exactly the best. People still have fonder memories of like Vista or even 7. And so, or 8.1, I should say, not even 7, Vista or 8.1. And this kind of keeps in line with what a lot of people were saying, that like almost every other version of Windows is the good one. Like every even numbered Windows interpretation or rehaul is the better one. And then the ones in between are kind of like the ones that a lot of people have problems with. So I want to say it's been about, 3-4 days since I finally installed Windows 11 on my computer. Kind of forcefully. Like, I tried to dodge it, but it kept saying, oh, we'll schedule it for this day. We'll schedule it for this day. There was no dismiss button. There was no skip button. It was all just like, oh, you could do it now, or we'll do it in like 3 days, and we'll automatically schedule it. So, like, when you basically it was at that point where it was saying, hey, when you shut down the computer, it's going to install Windows 11. Like, there was no ifs or buts about it. So I was like, all right, I guess this is something that we have to do now. So I went ahead and installed it. I left it overnight, kind of, patching up installing the updates, putting in the patch notes, etc., etc., and then finally turned it on for the very first time, having with the Windows 11 aesthetic. And I know that they were trying to kind of mimic a little bit of a Mac kind of look with the little taskbar having all the icons in the middle. Immediately, I organized that shit back over onto the left to retain as much of that original Windows look as possible, because I'm sorry, I'm just not a Mac guy. I'm not a Mac guy, so I was trying to keep it as Windows-centric as possible. I noticed that almost everything has like rounded corners. I was trying to see if I could turn that off, not because I disliked it, but like I said, I'm trying to keep it as originally as it was as possible. But I guess this is just one of those cases where I just have to embrace the change, embrace the differences, and just have to start getting accustomed to it. And so I was just going through all the different. Oh, excuse me. Oh, I don't know where I got the heart attack. Oh, so sorry. Bad demeanor, bad podcast demeanor. I apologize. But basically, I was trying to figure out a way to restore everything back to its original format, while at the same time still having maybe a little bit of that lift, a little bit of that workflow that Windows 11 was trying to make promises on to expedite, to make things a little quicker, a little snappier. Overall, my impressions of Windows 11, however, outside of the things that I'm a little, resistant to change, but I know I'm going to have to just learn to adapt and accept, the rounded corners, the taskbar being a little bit more prudent, like the shade of coloring on it, and navigating through the taskbar, navigating through the settings, all that good stuff. The differences in audio cues, like whenever you change the volume, that little it's the little cue, the little jingle, little chime is a little bit different. So a lot of very subservice stuff that I'm like, over time I know I'll get used to this. The only legitimate complaint, overall everything else is pretty much plays out the same as it was before. Like I said, a lot of aesthetical changes, a lot of visual things have been kind of revamped a little bit. Like when I open Windows Explorer, your Explorer windows, and you see your documents, whether it be videos or audio files or documents, photos, etc. They're all gonna have like this little tweak to them that's a little bit different. Everything, however, has been, for the most part, pretty good, except the one thing, especially as a content creator, as a video editor who has to manage a lot of files and needs to have that, like I said, that workflow be done really quickly. Unless I can come up with a solution, or I can go online and research some form of hack, or if anybody has come up with a solution online, my only legitimate problem has been being able to, with Windows 10 or 10.1 or whatever, 10.4, whatever you want to call it, the original version of Windows prior to 11, whenever I, say for example, this is the most clear-cut example that I can use right now. Say I'm editing a video, and I want to take clips that are in a folder, drag and drop them to Vegas, which Vegas Pro, my editing suite, but that editing suite is minimized. Before, I would be able to take the project files, simply just select whichever ones I want to drag and drop, hold them, drag them to the Vegas Pro icon that's minimized, and hover over it. And whenever I would hover over it, it would automatically open Sony Vegas. It would open Vegas Pro, right? It's not owned by Sony anymore. Vegas Pro. It would open it up, and it would open up the window, and therefore I could just, still holding the files, go from the taskbar where I hovered over it, and then go back up to the timeline. Now that the window's open, go into the timeline, drag and drop the files, and drop them up in there, and then it'll start building the peaks, building the SFK files, and start loading it up, and start, incorporating it into my project. Now it simply just doesn't do that in Windows 11, and this kind of creates this extra step that interrupts the workflow, because before I was just able to do an awful lot of dragging and dropping. Now I need to have the window from where I'm taking the files in the Explorer, and then the window of Vegas Pro both need to be open and taking up real estate on my screen, so that I can do that drag and drop traditionally. Because if I have Vegas minimized, it's not going to work. I drag it over the icon that has Vegas Pro minimized on the taskbar at the very bottom, it will not do anything. You just see a red circle with the cross through it saying, oh, I can't do this. Yeah, that's going to be a huge problem. Like I said, as a video editor, as a content creator, this interrupts the workflow because it kind of impedes something that I had established before. And yeah, I'm not really vibing with it too well. That's the only significant problem I'm certifiably having with Windows 11 right now. So if this manages to reach you through a social, one of the podcast platforms that has a comment section by some chance, or if you're listening to this on YouTube, in the comment section below or around here somewhere, please let me know if there's some kind of fix. If you're a content creator yourself, specifically a video editor, and you had to have Windows 11 installed, please let me know if there's some kind of fix for it. Otherwise, I will try in my spare time to figure out a fix, because right now, like I said, the only solutions is to either have both windows open up on my laptop screen, or in the future, this will probably put a bigger emphasis on probably getting a second monitor connected to the laptop or on the desktop whenever I start to migrate over to a pre-built desktop that I will then start working off of. Then I will definitely need two monitors. That way I can just drag and drop. One monitor will have my Explorer windows open with all the files, and then the other one's gonna have my editing suite completely open at all times. That way I can expedite all this shit, because as of right now, that original method of having something minimized and then being able to drag over it and that will automatically maximize, it's not happening anymore. And that to me is a huge issue. That's probably the only thing right now that's causing problems. And the reason why I'm being quite picky as far as how everything is kind of navigating and working on Windows 11 is because I'm also toying, kind of looking at my computer and just toying around with it a little bit more, because lately I've been bitten by a little bit more so of the writing bug. I haven't actually starting writing in the formal sense, but I have been, watching more videos of directors and writers talking about their work ethic, their stuff like that. I lately talking to my girlfriend, talking to my friends, and then seeing people post about how it's not, and by people I mean peers. I'm talking like actual writers. Most recently, C. Robert Cargill, who wrote The Black Phone, which is one of the movies out in theaters right now, The Black Phone, with Ethan Hawke. He is the writer of that film, and he has been posting things on Twitter, things on Instagram, things like that about how, words to inspire as far as like how not to be discouraged from feeling like there's an expiration date on writing or creating or filmmaking. After crossing 30, I have been feeling a little bit like, okay, is my time kind of running out? But he is, in his 40s, almost hitting, actually, no, I think he's in his 50s. But through his posts, he's been kind of, hammering home the point that he didn't start actually publishing his work, whether it be a book or selling a screenplay, until he was like 35 or 37, somewhere around there. And so, he's been talking an awful lot more about that. My girlfriend has been, saying, especially after certain things that her and I have been watching, haven't exactly been meeting that quality that we have been looking for, that she has turned around and started saying things like, hey, I'm not saying this to be sarcastic, like legit, like during your downtime when you're not editing videos for YouTube and you're not applying for jobs and you're not, working out at the gym and things like that, if you can find an hour or two out of your day, start writing. Start writing a simple little script, a simple little thing. And I'm like, yeah, why can't I do this? Why not? So, starting to kind of get into the mind state of hopefully building a routine of writing a little bit more as far as screenwriting, whether it be for a film or a TV pilot or something of that nature. And so, yeah, I've been, kind of doing a little bit of research, doing rewatching things that I've already watched in the past that just kind of get me motivated as far as watching stuff about, Fincher, about Aaron Sorkin, about all these different filmmakers and writers and things like that. So yeah, I've been doing a little bit of that, but of course, before we can even start installing screenwriting software on my computer, I got to get a little bit more acquainted with the new software that's on my computer, specifically Windows 11. And so far, like I said, for the most part, it's been a positive experience. I just don't like this whole minimizing issue, and I've been trying to deal with the taskbar, trying to mess around with it as much as possible, so hopefully I will find a fix for it soon. But enough about me. Let's go ahead, tackle the Obi-Wan series finale ? Because now we have Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen dropping hints that they might want to do a season 2. I'm like, no, because if you guys have been following these past few episodes of the Dark Spider Cast, or even follow me on Twitter, I don't know if there's any other areas that I've kind of expunged here on how I feel about the series, but after finally witnessing the finale, finally, bringing everything kind of down to a close, Obi-Wan should have been either a really tight 2-hour movie or just not have happened at all, to be brutally and completely honest. The finale pretty much brought a lot of things down to a close. It kind of paid off some things. It like the best way I can kind of bring everything and internalize everything and sum it up all in one sentence or one thought is that Obi-Wan, whether it be the show, the character, or even Darth Vader, the character himself, are written by either two people or two sets of people or two parties here in terms of the screenwriting, in terms of the way that it's produced, in terms of the way that it's directed. Even though it's directed by Deborah Chow, only one singular person, who I know can be a capable director. There's stuff under her filmography on IMDb that is legit quality. I think she did do one episode of I can't remember what show it was, but there was a really good show on there. She has shown that she can do it, but somehow, I don't know if it was Kathleen Kennedy or there was meddling. I don't know what transpired here. But like I said, it feels like there were two parties handling the entire endeavor. Not only the finale, but the show as a whole. A party that loves Star Wars, and then a party that either hates Star Wars or just doesn't care for it or is not interested in it. Vader kind of exemplifies this way of thinking that I have, this way of of kind of viewing the series as a whole, and like I said, the finale and the way that we're kind of it paid off here, where it's like it kind of ends up being in a too little too late kind of situation, where certain things are badass and cool and awesome and are cathartic for the show. Like in the last episode, we had the flashback of Obi-Wan and Anakin training from the Attack of the Clone days, or before the events of Attack of the Clones. And, it kind of tied in very thematically to what the stuff that's going down in the story. But then there were other questionable decisions. Like I said, Vader has this cool moment where he's toying around with Reva and he's doing all these things. But then he makes that stupid decision afterwards that I thought, okay, maybe it's some kind of part of his plan. But the finale pretty much confirmed that had nothing to do with some plan. It was legit a screw up in the writing. All right, to the point where it made it really difficult for me to defend it versus other people that genuinely loved the show, loved even episode 4. it's because of Obi-Wan that there was actually one particular YouTube channel. I'm not going to mention any names here, but there's a particular YouTube channel that I actually had to unsubscribe from because they were loving every episode of Obi-Wan. Every episode reaction video that they did had to open with almost like a disclaimer, almost like a mandatory disclaimer of them saying, anybody who doesn't like this show can kiss my ass, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, yeah, and I'm being a little hyperbolic. But they're saying it in a way where I'm like, okay, I feel like you guys are more tickled by this whole differentiating of opinion rather than we are. We're just heartbroken because they couldn't write an Obi-Wan series. So all these things combined, I'm like, yeah, I think I've outgrown this channel, and I unfortunately had to unsubscribe. And Obi-Wan was the catalyst. But that's just it. It's just that there was just so many things inside of the show that I just could not defend. The finale still has some of those problems. Like I said, it's going back and forth between something really cool and something really awesome. And it just gets exhausting after a while. After a while, I'm just kind of exhausted thinking to myself, like, I don't want to string along for a second season if this is going to be the quality and it's going to be lacking all this focus. The Way of the Jedi is supposed to be all about focus, and yet there was no focus, not only in this finale, but also in this show. The finale, for example, without going into too much spoilers, it's in halves. It's really in halves, where you have one half being a very poignant payoff with a great visuals, a great lightsaber duel, great choreography, badass moments that I looked at and went, okay, that was dope. Like I got an audible reaction that my girlfriend was able to bear witness to, be like, oh yeah, I enjoyed that part. That part was awesome. That visual was cool. That was haunting. They did something with audio that was really, really amazing, that I have to give credit to whoever came up with that, whether it be Deborah Chow herself or the screenwriters or whoever. Like, that was a brilliant idea that played with audio in a very story-driven kind of way. That was amazing. And then you have the other half that is trying to evoke, like, this sense of tension, this sense of, like, oh, I'm gonna get you, but like I said, without going into too much detail, in case some of you may not haven't been caught up with Obi-Wan, or haven't watched the finale, or you've been busy, or you were waiting for all episodes to finally be out, which this is probably the time to finally binge it through. They do this other half has this, like I said, this false sense of tension dealing with this subplot involving characters from the original trilogy, and because of that, we know that they're gonna be fine. So what's the point of spending more time than we need to just to bloat out the episode by having this half be like, oh, what's going to happen with these? We know what's going to happen. They're in the actual main trilogy, or at least, a few of them are in the first movie, and then one of them is fucking the whole trilogy. That's why I'm like, why is this tension here? This could have been solved, and why are we cross-cutting between this part and then the actual exciting part? Like, if I was in charge of editing, or if I was Deborah Chow, I would be like, okay, everybody knows how these characters are going to be later on in the original 77 movie. Might as well just get this out of the way in one swift go, and then focus on that much more pivotal part of the show. That show, that aspect that everyone so far that I've watched on YouTube, that I've seen the comments on YouTube, that I've seen people talk about on Twitter, on Facebook groups, even on Discord servers that I'm a part of, are saying that should have been the focus. That should have been the focus of the entire, not just the series finale here, but the entire show, in a way where it either should have been a 3 or 4 part miniseries without any tantalizations for a second season, or a 2-hour movie, if that's going to be, frankly, the case. Because I remember it, this reminds me of, God, what was it? I think it was a historical drama, a retelling or whatever. They're like, oh, this is going to be a miniseries. And I'm like, okay, so it's probably too long for it to be a movie, but then they said it was a 2-part miniseries and each episode was only an hour. So I'm like, why didn't you just do a TV movie then? It didn't make any sense. And I feel like that's probably what should have happened with Obi-Wan, but instead they had to bloat it out. And I have seen some people on Twitter, on both Twitter and YouTube, trying to defend it, saying, oh, if you look at it, each episode is written as a little mini adaptation of the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy, and it's mirroring that. And I'm like, that doesn't make it good. I used an analogy on responding to somebody's comment on YouTube saying, that's like my friend saying, "Hey, I got us pizza." I go over to his house and he's got those Totino pizza rolls popped out of the oven. That's not pizza. You told me you had pizza. Those are just microwavable artificial pizza rolls. You didn't actually order a pizza. That that doesn't make any sense to me. And so that's pretty much the defense that people were trying to make for the overall show and the way that it was written. And I'm like, I can't defend this. I really, really cannot. All punctuated by honestly a terrible cameo. There was a cameo here at the end that everybody went crazy for. Again, going back to that channel that I had to unsubscribe for, they got hyped, and I'm over here going, this was literally a throwaway. There was literally another moment in this exact episode where he could have appeared and it could have played into the story, but because for reasons, it's just there at the end as like a haha, look who it is, and I'm just like, no, fuck you. No. Just roll the credits, please. Roll the credits. They're the credits. Cool. It's over. It's done. I'm legitimately exhausted talking about Obi-Wan anymore. That I'm like, nah. And unfortunately, there's enough. I think there was enough viewership and enough turnout that I would not be surprised. I would be more surprised if they actually end up saying no, there's not going to be a season 2 versus the opposite. So we might as well brace for it. Brace for a spin-off Reva show, because I know that's probably coming in some capacity. But this, I like to look at Obi-Wan as more so of a cautionary tale rather than an actual Star Wars event. And now that I think about it, this kind of brings into perspective or thought, what about shows that aren't seemingly getting a good turnout, aka Ms. Marvel? Because now I've watched episode 3, kind of more or less caught up with Ms. Marvel up until probably this newer episode, which is probably already out by the time this podcast is up. But I'm actually in the process of waiting on my girlfriend because she actually was out of town this Wednesday, so I'm going to have to wait an additional couple of days since we're both watching it, and it's frankly the only show that we can watch now that Obi-Wan is done. And that's the thing, is like with Ms. Marvel, considering that is a show that has been getting a lower turnout, but yet the quality is much more streamlined and fluid and well-paced versus that of Obi-Wan, that I still stand by my guns, saying that Ms. Marvel is the superior show, even though I will say and admit that I think we finally got our slightly weaker episode, because they were consistent with the first two. For me, episode 3, though still good, is probably the weakest of the 3 that have been released thus far, not counting, like I said, 4, because I've yet to watch that. But I think this is finally the one that I saw, okay, this did have a significant enough blemish, because in the past couple of episodes, it's all been about Kamala learning how to harness her powers, how she's going to fit in an Avengers filled world as her own superhero and as her own form of Avengers fan, while at the same time dealing with the pushback from her family. Episode 3 kind of has her dealing with her family in a much more head-on way, in a much more accepting way, where it's like, okay, instead of fighting with my family, I think I'm going to have to actually talk to a few more of them to learn about the background behind the bangle, which is the bracelet around her arm. I keep forgetting that they're called bangles, and learning exactly the heritage, the background of it, in order to understand where the powers come from and how she's able to maybe, hopefully, control these powers. And that was pretty much the bulk of the episode, and because of that, I feel like it had a little bit less to say as far as being profound, and it was a bit more of a, Kamala talking to these people, Kamala talking to this other person to try to figure out information, and we're figuring out information with her. And because of that, like I said, she still retains that amount of likability, but it was just a little bit slower paced for me. But it's still, like I said, it had enough of its charm, whether it be with its visual flair, how it kind of navigates, like I said, text conversations, and how it has like the aesthetical look, but also just because of the cast themselves. God, I'm always blanking on her name, Imani Milan. Again, I'm butchering the last name. I always forget it. I've looked it up already, literally in between episodes. Looked it up like 2 or 3 times, but keep making the cardinal sin of not looking it up before talking about Miss Marvel on the show, so I apologize. But our lead actress here, she's still doing a kick-ass job, all the supporting cast and whatnot. But this time we do throw in a new group into the mix, the clandestines, which is what they're calling themselves, and it's this new group that we get kind of introduced to via a certain unfolding of events towards the last portion of the second episode. And like I said, the last episode had a little bit more to say as far as like social commentary and being, like I said, profound. That's not to say that that's completely absent here in episode 3. You know, there's moments where they have to address how the optics look with a government leg, like the Department of Damage Control is investigating people of Muslim heritage. You know, it doesn't look right, and the characters are calling up on their shit, saying, "Hey, this don't look right. You should probably back up, son." You know what I'm saying? So it's cool to see that they're still addressing that, not ignoring it. So I do think that's pretty cool and pretty progressive for Marvel to take reins of that. You know what I'm saying, and not be tone deaf to it. But more so to the point, it introduces these characters that have some kind of connection with the Bengal. This is where that weak spot finally caves in and makes me go, yeah, it's because of this. This is probably the weaker of the episodes. Because without going into too much of spoiler territory, in case you're not caught up on Ms. Marvel, especially with episode 3, there's some stuff that unfolds with this group that you can telegraph from a mile away. I was like, I already know where these people are going, and yep, that's pretty much where we end up by the time credits roll. And then on top of that, we finally get into some more action-heavy territory, whether it be with Kamala embracing her powers or with her just trying to take on some antagonistic forces. And the choreography starts to teeter on that of a TV budget, where you can see that these are stunt actors and not really like full-on actors, you know what I'm saying? And like, you know, and a little bit of the choreography is in there, and I'm just kind of like, you know, I'm just kind of like watching it, and I'm not feeling like the bite, I'm not feeling the punches, I'm not feeling the fight or anything like that. I'm more so just kind of passively watching it. You know what I'm saying? I haven't seen anything that's on the. I will probably go as far as to say that the Daredevil show, you know, obviously that was a different division with Netflix, but you know, it's making me miss Daredevil. It's even making me miss goddamn Captain and the Winter Soldier. I feel I had better fight sequences than this, and I understand because this is meant to be a younger targeted show, you know, with Miss Marvel being a teenager and whatnot, but at the same time, there's going to be a point where those stakes are going to have to start elevating. And I don't think that this group is going to be it to be able to pack that punch, both figuratively and literally. But there's still enough time, especially with the 4th episode. And you know what they say? With these Marvel shows, that 4th episode is usually the banger, which always makes sense because if they're following a 6-episode layout, then they're obviously going to be following the 3-act structure, and usually by episode 4 is when we're starting to enter our 3rd act, and that's why we need some kind of twist or some kind of revelation in the plot that just changes the dynamic and the direction of the story. And because of that, that's often why the 4th episode of all these 6-episode shows ends up being the banger that they are. So I have high expectations. Quite frankly, I do have some somewhat risen expectations with episode 4, and even though episode 3 was still a good, enjoyable episode, it was definitely the weaker of the 3 in my viewpoint. But still, I am eager to continue Miss Marvel and giving it the support that it deserves, especially with now Obi-Wan kind of out of the picture, and with that She-Hulk right on the horizon. I know doesn't exactly look the visually most appealing, but certain assets of it do. All right, I'm going to shut up now. And then when it comes to the reviews on the movie side of things, I have to talk about Jurassic World Dominion and Lightyear, 2 movies that me and the girlfriend kind of saw from week to week. Jurassic World Dominion, it sucks. Moving on, Lightyear. So, you know, and here's the thing, is like, it's so exhausting to talk about Jurassic World Dominion. It's more, well, I gotta be honest, I don't know what's more exhausting, to talk about Jurassic World Dominion or to actually watch it, because this was having the distinct honor of being the longest Jurassic Park movie or Jurassic World related movie being at 2 hours and 26 minutes or 2 hours and 20 something minutes. And the whole time I'm just thinking to myself, like, okay, you could probably make the excuse that the reason why is because they're bringing everybody together. You're bringing the old team from Jurassic Park with Sam Neill, Jeff Goldblum, and Laura Dern, respectively, with the new team, Chris Pratt, Bryce Dallas Howard, even some characters from Fallen Kingdom. And so the entire time you're thinking to yourself, okay, this is meant to be like the conclusion, the culmination of all that stuff. This is like the end game because that's the strategy that an awful lot of these franchises are now utilizing to get butts and seats. And so that's pretty much the agenda that Jurassic World Dominion was kind of filling. And because that was at the forefront of the marketing, of the posters, of the trailers, there was just very little hype, really, for me personally. A lot of people were. I actually had some close friends that were pretty unexpectedly excited for the movie. There was one in particular that I'm like, really, you? Out of all people that I know, you're excited for the movie? Even my girlfriend was because, as she puts it, dinosaurs. I honestly can't even defend her rationale behind wanting to see the movie because dinosaurs themselves take a backseat in a movie that's called Jurassic World. That's right. Without some people may have already spoiled this for some of you folks, but Jurassic World Dominion, I don't know if it's because of the bloated runtime, but for a little while I was like, am I even watching a Jurassic World or Jurassic Park related movie? Because yes, there's dinosaurs in there, and it starts with an interesting kind of hook because I was one of the people. I was one of the slightly cautiously optimistic people that were very intrigued by the ending of Fallen Kingdom. For those of you who have not seen Fallen Kingdom, spoilers, but dinosaurs are pretty much unleashed onto the earth via a particular character's irrational decision. Like the actual decision that she took was nonsensical and stupid, but the actual concept of dinosaurs being released on the earth outside of an island is genuinely intriguing. It's genuinely awesome. I was like, okay, that's actually, post-apocalyptic dino crisis type shit. I'm like, you know what? That could actually work for a third movie. So here we are. And then as the movie went on past those opening few minutes, I was like, yeah, this is not the movie. No. This is not going to be the movie that I was hopefully painting in my brain. And it wasn't. It really, really wasn't, because it was going back and forth between a plot that has to do with locusts threatening the environment outside of the fucking dinosaurs that are actually roaming around, and then what is very much not even a Jurassic-related movie. It was like a Jack Reacher level type, and even Jack Reacher has higher standards than this, but this espionage type thing, kidnap thing, it was like Taken 2 or Taken 3. I'm not even going to insult the first Taken movie by comparing it to the first Taken movie. I'm going to compare it to Taken 2 or 3. On that level of chicanery. You know what I'm saying? Like, that just happens to involve dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are just kind of sprinkled in there, like Salt Bae. That guy with the glasses and the white tank top that he's like sprinkling the salts that was like famous for 15 minutes and then just kind of disappeared. Like that. The way he sprinkled salt on that meat, that's how this movie sprinkles dinosaurs onto itself. The rest is just, like I said, all this other shit that finally conjoins, because the locust stuff predominantly takes up the old team, Sam Neill, Laura Dern, and Jeff Goldblum, but the way it's all edited together and finally comes to the forefront about an hour-ish and sometime in, it's just too little too late that I'm like, I don't care. And then at the center of it all is this bad guy that doesn't need to be there, that as soon as he popped up on screen, I'm like, oh, hey, look, it's Tim Cook from Apple. That's very obviously who they're trying to model it after. And I even told my girlfriend, like, it's Tim Cook, right? And even she didn't know who he was. And I told her after the movie, look him up. And she looked him up and she's like, oh my God, it really is. It was very obvious. But yeah, there was just like no, man. If this is how the Jurassic era, as they're calling it, is going out, I'm out. I am sincerely out. I was checked out of the movie so early on that I very, very rarely do this. But there was a rail guard in front of us when we went to go see the movie. I managed to choose seats in front of the rail guard because my girlfriend likes to put her feet up because her feet she has like that restless leg syndrome or whatever, where she like starts to fidget and it starts to act up in terms of like muscle pain and all that stuff. So she has to elevate her legs. I threw my legs up and kicked back, and I don't like to do that when I see the movie because sometimes my legs and my feet kind of get in the way of the screen, and I'm like, no, I want to see the whole picture, right? I couldn't give two flying fucks about Jurassic World Dominion. I threw my legs up and I'm like, I'm just passively watching it. I'm not invested. My brain is off. I'm just, nah. I'm just wait. I hate to say this, but I was just waiting for it to be over. I really was. And if I'm waiting for your movie to be over, then I feel like you should withhold the very firm and distinct honor of probably so far being the worst movie that I have seen this year. And that title so far currently, unless I manage to see something even worse or I just see more movies in a much more in broad strokes, so far Jurassic World Dominion is my worst movie of the year. And I'm pretty certain that there's like a number of other things that bothered me about the film. Very, moment to moment things, little details and things like that as I was watching the movie. Like I said, so many things that just kind of picked apart for me. Like if you love the dinosaurs in the Jurassic Park movies, and then furthermore you like the death scenes when these stupid people start getting eaten and one by one by the dinosaurs, then even that, in my opinion, that aspect about the movie is also disappointing. I don't know if this is considered a spoiler, but there's literally, I think, 3 people that die in the movie from being eaten by dinosaurs, and 2 of them are off screen. And I guess this is going to be a spoiler, but the one that you do see get eaten on screen is the one from the trailer, the guy on the scooter. Yeah, if you're riding trying to get away from a dinosaur on a scooter, you kind of deserve to get eaten. I'm sorry. And that's it. That is it. That's really how played down the dinosaurs are. And like I said, there's so many other stuff that probably bothered me moment to moment, but the things that I just commented on is what really stood out to me as making me go, yeah, fuck this movie. And another thing that doesn't really help is that it's actually been quite a while since I saw this last week. And because of that, there's probably some of those details that I know probably bother me or escaping my brain right now, because at the forefront of my memory is more so Lightyear, which I actually saw just a few days ago with the girlfriend as well. And the thing about Lightyear is that I thoroughly believe that this movie's getting bombed online, or review bombed, whether it be through Rotten Tomatoes with the audience score, whether it be with Metacritic, with submissions, or even IMDb by people creating accounts and submitting them that way. Because I opened it up on IMDb and I'm seeing it get like a 5 point something out of 10, lower scores than even I think either the first or even the second Despicable Me movie. Lower scores, really? And so I walk out of the movie and I go, okay, so the best way I can kind of compartmentalize everything, without going into spoilers, there's a scene in Lightyear that has our main character, Buzz Lightyear, along with a team, trying to overcome an obstacle, a security measure, that as it unfolded, I thought to myself, whoa, okay, this is actually pretty clever, because it's a pretty interesting security measure device, and it's thematically tying into the narrative of the story. It's tying into the messaging of the story, and I'm like, okay, cool, I get it. Unfortunately, before the scene and the movie as a whole is able to kind of retain, hold on to that cleverness, one of the characters then verbalizes that thematic messaging by actually telling us that that's what needs to be done. You get what I'm saying? Like, then you have a character actually say this out loud. What I'm saying right now into the mic, a character actually says this inside of the scene. And I'm like, yeah, this pretty much sums up Lightyear's greatest problem, is that it often busies itself trying to tell us about how sometimes our characters are feeling, how our characters need to do certain things and this and that, rather than showing us. It sometimes falls into the trapping of talking down to the kids within the family aspect of a family-friendly film, as opposed to actually showing or conveying that message and, having the movie speak for it itself, as far as just telling the story instead of actually stopping the movie to be like, well, this is what this feels, or this is how this character is feeling right now. And here's the thing: that's not to say that it does it in a very pandering and insulting sort of way. Because walking out of the movie, like one of the words that stuck out to me was harmless. It was very, very harmless. There was never a moment that I was like, oh my god, can we move on, or anything like that. Although the judgment is still the jury's still out for Taika Waititi's character, Mo Morrison. He's one of the characters on the team that's infamously clumsy to the point where I'm like, all right, this guy. we know that if he was really on a Space Ranger mission, this guy would have to go. This guy would be the first nominee for someone who needs to stay behind if they have to like remote detonate a bomb like in Armageddon. It's like, oh, somebody needs to stay behind. I would nominate this guy like immediately. I'll be like, nope, we could do without you. So that guy is kind of contestable. Contestable? Is that even a word? Anyways, but beyond that, I never saw this as an insulting film or an irritating film or egregious or anything like that. It's just that at times it felt like it was just telling more than it was able to just show, because Pixar was always elevating the bar with prior films of being able to show rather than to tell. I mean, do we really need to go further into the opening 10 minutes of Up? It never told. It just showed us this background of Carl, and then the movie kind of unfolds so that you're able to hold on to those opening 10 minutes of Up for the rest of the film and understand what's at stake and what's motivating Carl, the old man, in Up the entirety of the way through. Funny that I subconsciously just thought of Up, because this movie has quite a bit in common with Up, except unlike Up, like I said, it sometimes feels like Buzz Lightyear, or the movie Lightyear, is rushing to the finish line. And because of that, like I said, it's almost like scenes that were probably best showing rather than telling end up resorting to telling, because they're trying to like get to the next action scene, get to the next cool moment, which is generally cool. Like I said, it doesn't feel superfluous or anything like that, because Lightyear is filled with an awful lot of cool moments and also great payoffs for people who are fans of the Toy Story series, at least for me. There's certain little Easter eggs and certain little callbacks to the original 1999 film, 95 film, that, you know, whether it be a line you probably saw some from the trailers where he says, "Why don't they answer?" You know, that's obviously a riff on Buzz Lightyear when he first gets introduced in the 1995 Toy Story. So it's cool that there's little things like that, because as the movie kind of opens up with the little log line saying, "This is the movie that Andy saw in theaters." It just does, however, pose the question, would there have been a better movie for him to have watched? Because there's moments where I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I don't believe that something like this would have been generated in 1995. This feels more like a movie that was generated in 2022. So because of that, like I said, there's moments where it's like, well, you got to sell the toys, you got to talk to the kids. Even though, as much as I am completely aware he's there to sell the toys, yeah, I want my own socks. Socks the cat, the robot cat. Yeah, Disney did it again. Sold me on a fucking toy, but that thing was awesome. It was genuinely awesome, unfortunately, and he stole some of a good chunk of the scenes throughout the film, and his robotic charisma and chemistry with Buzz himself is just awesome. That I'm like, yep, if they're gonna make a second one, there's no way that you guys can do it without socks. Outside of that, like I said, it's a very harmless film with easily one of the best looking Pixar films, as far as not only the way that the quality of animation is still there, but also the way it's able to treat space. It's able to treat a spectacle, especially watching it in IMAX. There's the little trivia going around that they made an in-engine IMAX camera, so there's certain scenes where the aspect ratio opens up, and it opens up in a way that I would have, if I was filming a movie for IMAX and such. So that was really awesome to see, and you can actually feel space kind of going through you, especially if you're watching it on the front row in IMAX. And so a lot of elements are really great about the film, but there's so many others that I think they stand out as very subpar, only because of how above par Pixar has been in the past. And I feel like we're at a turning point, at a crossroads rather, actually. of Pixar kind of now, those great directors all around Andrew Stanton, Pete Docter, and unfortunately, regardless of the allegations he's since had against him, John Lasseter, who pioneered Pixar, that period, that silver age or golden age, whatever you want to call it, of Pixar, is now moving on and now passing down ideas and projects down to different directors that are still potentially a little green around the gills. And that's why we're dealing with an awful lot of Pixar movies that, as enjoyable films as they are, they're not exactly, we all have to admit, they're not exactly hitting the way that they would just hit one after another. Brad Bird is another good example. Like when we were going, like mid 2000s, Pixar is like peak Pixar so far as, a banger after banger. Finding Nemo, Incredibles, Ratatouille, Wall-E, Up. It just, like I said, one after another. It's just very difficult to look back at a greater age of Pixar than that bracket of time right there. Toy Story, and then capping it all in the 2010 with Toy Story 3. And then afterwards, we started to get the Cars 2, we started to get Good Dinosaur, we started to get the spin-offs like Finding Dory. Toy Story 4 was a really good movie, but a lot of people agreed that it was kind of unnecessary considering how perfect the ending to 3 was. So, yeah, like I said, we're in a new era of Pixar where a lot of things are kind of handed down, and I feel like Lightyear is another byproduct of that, where you have great things about it, but then also some not so good things about it that ultimately make it a film that I was glad I watched. But if someone were to look at the trailer and be like, "I'll wait for Disney Plus on that one," I would not hesitate to say, "Hey, I don't blame you. I don't blame you whatsoever for checking this out later on." I'm glad that I watched it in IMAX, but it's definitely a movie that if you watch it out of the comfort of your own home, you'll probably enjoy it just the same. So for this week's What I've Been Playing segment, I only got one game. I technically have started another game, but I'm gonna wait until next week to talk about that one, only because it's a bit on the shorter side. There's a little bit less to talk about because it's technically kind of like a walking sim / point and click kind of choose your own adventure type thing, episodic thing. And so because of that, I'm like, you know what? There's a little less to talk about there. I might as well sandwich that with a second game next week. This week, it's all about Mafia II Definitive Edition. I finally loaded that up. I was very hesitant to buy this game for the longest time back from its release in 2020, because in 2020 is when they released the next, I guess you can call it next-gen updates or definitive updates for Mafia 2 and 3, but they also released that remake for the original, which I did play like the day that it came out, because when they announced that it was going to be a full-blown remake and not a like retexturing, remaster, definitive edition type of touch-up where they're just polishing the visuals, refining it, making sure that it's like updated, up-res for 4K, etc., etc. I was like, yeah, if it was something like that, I probably would have passed on it. But when they said that it was a full-blown, from the ground-up remake, like if you see the side-by-side comparison, you can easily tell it's a completely different game. That's pretty much a brand new Mafia game. I was like, yeah, let me buy that. Played it back in 2020. Really, really enjoyed it, actually. I played it on stream back when I was still streaming on Twitch. And so I knew that I was going to have to make my way through the Mafia trilogy. Because I do own 3 for the PlayStation, but it's still in the backlog, it's still wrapped up in the cellophane, and I know it's coming up here, but before we get to that, I really want to get the full Mafia experience. So eventually I knew I was going to need to pull the trigger, that was intended, on Mafia 2. I just grew immensely hesitant when I saw a lot of bad reviews on that definitive edition, saying that it's buggy as all hell, it's an unplayable mess. And so I thought to myself, okay, if most of the problems are on a technical fashion, I guess the best that I can do right now is just wait, tackle the rest of my backlog, play all the games that I generally want to play out of the year, and then get to Mafia 2 when I get to it, as far as that definitive edition, in hopes that maybe they polish up some of those bugs, clean it up, and give it the proper release that it deserves. So here we are 2 years later. Not too long ago, I want to say about 3 or 4 months ago, there was a sale on Mafia 2, going from, I think its retail price, I think it was going for like 30 or 40 bucks, but it went down to like $10 for Mafia 2, and it included all the DLC. It was the full pack definitive edition. And so I thought to myself, all right, you know what? That's actually a pretty good deal for $10. So I went, got it. Still sitting on my backlog, but it was finally this past week that I finally managed to play the game and unload on Mafia 2. So similar to the original Mafia, it's I want to call it a pseudo open world third person action game where you play as Vito Scaletta, a different character from the first game. And that's some things that a lot of people would say, oh yeah, the Mafia games are different stories. You can play whichever one at any order. I kind of disagree. Because even though you play as different protagonists and you're technically tackling a different story for said protagonists, there's always some kind of connection or interwoven plot line that I think will have amplified value if you do play it in the chronological order of 1, 2, and 3. I can definitely say, without going into spoilers, there's aspects, specifically one later on, from Mafia 2 that was a little heightened and amplified by having played the remake a couple years back. And I'm like, yes, this is why I love storytelling and materials such as this, is because with Mafia 2, you play as Vito Scaletta and how he comes back home from the war in 1945, and instead of trying to live a quiet and peaceful life, he thought to himself, you know what, screw all that. I kind of want to make money, drink, hang out with girls, and live the life as best as I possibly can. And because of that, he gets pretty much embroiled into the mafia industry in Empire Bay, which is like this fictionalized, loosely adapted version of New York for obvious reasons. And so you're pretty much going through these time periods in his life of how, shit goes from good to not so good to bad to worse, and how Vito's gonna get out of this one along with his friend Joe and his affiliates, while, like I said, going into the drama behind the family, or families I should say. And so that's pretty much one of the reasons why I was very intrigued with the Mafia series, is because you're pretty much playing a video game version of Goodfellas, The Godfather, all the different kind of Italian, mob stories that inspired it. And it's done very, very well. Granted, I would say between this and the remake, I mean, one can make the argument that maybe the reason why the remake was a bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? More nuanced, is because it was a remake and because they were able to kind of revamp a little bit of the story for modern audiences and more contemporary climates. Mafia 2, on the other hand, even though it still tells a pretty good story and really fleshes and these characters kind of teeter on caricature, it's the voice talents that are able to hone in on them. Everybody does a spectacular job on the ensemble cast. I would probably say I prefer the story on the first one because it feels a bit more legacy driven, whereas with the second one, the story is not necessarily bad. It's still very interesting to see this drama kind of unfold, figure out who's betraying who needs to take care of who, and how they're going to be able to get out of this one when the shit hits the fan. But in my opinion, I feel like Vito's a much less interesting character than Tommy Angelo was in the first one. And granted, like I said, I played the remake. I didn't play the original one, but the remake, that version of Tommy was just so compelling and just held you from beginning to end, made you empathize with the character despite the heinous things that he has done. With Vito, so many moments, even though I liked him and liked watching him and liked playing as him, never did I think to myself, oh no, how can this happen to him? No, I was kind of like, you kind of deserved it. You kind of saw this, because you're not really learning from your mistakes. You don't really have a stake. I'm not saying that stories need to have like a forced romance sort of thing, but in the first one, Tommy had, his wife, his girlfriend to kind of hook onto. He had that thing to lose. Here, Vito, yeah, sure, he's got Joe, but Joe is also in the business with him. He's in the family with him. He's in, outside of that, I feel like Joe had more to lose on the external side as opposed to Vito, and then Vito is just kind of there. Even though he's likable to watch and likable to play as, there's not this like thing that made me go, oh no, think about this thing. You know what I'm saying? Like nothing moved me in that direction. And because of that, that's probably why the story and the characters had less of a grip on me than the one of the first ones did. And granted, like I said, playing devil's advocate, I played the remake of the first one and not exactly the first game back in whenever it came out, like early 2000s or whatever. So because of that, there was a little bit less to latch onto with Mafia 2, but the gameplay was pretty solid going from mission to mission. Like the variety is something that I can definitely praise about this game because never did it feel monotonous. Almost every mission had something new about it that made me think to myself like, wow, we really are like, this really is just a game that's only about 10 or 11 hours long. It's going by pretty quickly. But another thing that helped go thoroughly very quickly is because there's no side missions, which is why I'm a little puzzled as to why it needed to be open world in the first place. You get to pretty much explore all of Empire Bay. I just don't see the reason for why that is. Why you need to be, the game calls on you to be able to drive to certain places and navigate the environment. The environment's not bad looking, especially after being upresed on 4K scaling, and the textures have been revamped. Everything looks much more pristine in the definitive edition. And thankfully, after waiting for 2 years later, it's definitely a much more polished version than it initially was, though it still had its problems. There's still some funky AI. There were a couple of missions that take place at night, and whenever I would drive around at night, certain lights in the lamps would like blow out and slow the frame rate to a crawl, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? But thankfully, the game didn't crash on me, surprisingly. So there's still some technical hiccups there that have been left in even 2 years later, and I don't think that they have since release some kind of patch or anything like that to address them, so that's unfortunate. But for the most part, my main fundamental issue with the game is that's why I said at the beginning pseudo open world, because even though it's a sandbox, there's no side missions. There's nothing to really do in the world, so the whole time I was thinking to myself, why couldn't it have just been a linear experience with just cutscene that are done, effectively well? So that was probably one of the things that was kind of pushing me at bay, but at least to fill in some of those spots, you at least had another character that was tagging along. You had the radio listening to that other character that's tagging along. You have conversations and something's kind of happening along the way. There's always some kind of turning point, some kind of anchor to make me go, okay, this is what I'm playing for. And so overall, I actually really enjoyed my time with Mafia 2's story, even though it didn't hook me as much as 1 did. Playing through 1 did elevate the experience for 2, only because I knew how this game kind of plays out. Like I said, some things didn't exactly age the best, whether it be on the technical side, like some of these character models, some of the, like I said, the gameplay baked within the world that felt a little bit empty. And then, of course, the elephant in the room here, which is actually addressed by the definitive edition itself with a little caption at the beginning saying, hey, we didn't change the game from its release in 2010 in relation to the subject matter, but we need to let you know in advance that there's going to be some shitting here that could potentially offend. And yes, there's a lot of things said and seen in this game that will definitely not fly today. But it was still released, and I still have to give them kudos for at least not compromising the vision here. So there are those things to kind of know ahead of time. But my biggest problem, my biggest offender would probably be just how abrupt the ending is. A lot of people will come to defend the ending. I still think that the ending just felt like someone ran out of time and said, well, ended in this environment, ended in this fashion, instead of having a much more nuanced boss fight or much more of a climactic battle. There's actually a boss fight earlier in the game that I thought made for a better final boss fight than the actual final fight we actually end up with, along with a cutscene that just felt like, well, it is what it is. I was expecting to hear Sinatra's "That's Life" just playing, and credits just all of a sudden roll, and I'm like, huh, that was it. Okay, I feel like I need a little bit more, which is why I felt compelled enough to jump into the DLC that's actually thrown in with the definitive edition of Mafia 2. Unfortunately, that was kind of a mistake, because you know how I said that in the core game, the sandbox is kind of empty, but on the bright side, you have the radio to listen to, and if you get tired of the radio, more often than not, you have a secondary character like Joe or another one of your affiliates that's riding alongside you to kind of keep the dialogue and keep the conversation going and the momentum going. The DLC doesn't actually do this, and because of that, it lost me quickly. And an argument could be made that maybe it was my fault for jumping directly into the DLC. I've had a history for not doing so well with DLC of a game that I jump into directly after playing the core game, because then I start to experience a little bit of burnout, a little bit of fatigue on the game, because subconsciously my brain is going, hey, you just rolled credits on the game. You beat the game. Why are you playing the DLC? You might as well space this out or leave this for another time when you're bored. It happened with me in Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. It happened with me in Dishonored. And now it seemed like it happened again with Mafia 2. Because I tried giving the DLC a chance. You come with 3 DLC packs. The first 2 are both connected in the sense that you play as a character named Jimmy in an alternate timeline, where he's pretty much a fixer. He goes around and takes care of jobs, except the first pack of the DLC ends in a way that ultimately betrays him, because that's why it's called the Betrayal of Jimmy. And then the second one is called Jimmy's Vendetta, which is pretty much him getting out of prison and trying to pretty much take care of the people that wronged him. Spoilers, if you want to consider it that way. The downside, however, is that all 3 packets of DLC, specifically these 2, but all 3 in general, are treated in an arcade fashion where every mission you do, you have to load it up. You have you have a high score leaderboard that you want to land on, but more importantly, you have a time limit. Each mission has to be done under a time limit. And one of the beauties about the core game was that I'm able to do the main missions without worrying about a time limit, being able to kind of go about my own pace. So if there was a time limit, I'm like, well, once I accept a mission, I'm wired into the mission. I can't do anything else. It also doesn't help that they're very, very stingy on cutscenes. In fact, the Jimmy DLC, the DLC pack 1 and 2, literally have like 5 minutes worth of cutscenes, and everything else in between is just these arcade missions that start to get repetitive after a while. After a while, it's like, oh, shoot this place up. Oh, kill this one guy. Oh, blow these things up. And you just do mission after mission after mission, and there's not enough like narrative material the way that the main game was able to thread along, whether it be, like I said, a guy talking to you inside of the car when you're driving, because there's no fast travel in either the core game or the DLC. So you can't fast travel, you can't make things quicker and snappier. And then to make matters worse, I don't know if it was just me, again, experiencing burnout or what, but the AI for the NPCs in the sandbox driving is fucking terrible. People here in the high desert drive just an inkling better than the AI do here in Mafia 2, or at least the DLC. And because of that, I was pulling my hair out by the time that I just gave up on the DLC. I couldn't play it anymore. I couldn't play it. I couldn't bring myself to keep getting game overs on these missions because they're timed. I was running out of time, and I was running out of time because I was trying to drive through the sandbox, trying to avoid people, crashing into people, because these cops have eyes on the back of their head. They're literally like blocks away, but I'm behind them, but because this dumbass ran into me around the corner and we hit, the cop that's, again, a block away goes, I got my eyes on a hit and runner, 10-4, and I'm like, bro, like, I'm on a deadline here. I'm trying to run away, and the AI was just so fucking frustrating on all 3 pieces of DLC. I stuck around a little longer with the third one because you actually get to play as Joe, one of the side characters from the first game, so there was a little bit more of a storytelling kind of connection. Like, I had more of an empathy, more an affiliation with that character, and because of that, I was like, okay, I'm willing to play with you as more. There were more cutscenes. There was more of a connection with the core game because it takes place during a time where the main character Vito kind of goes away for a little while, so this was kind of filling in that gap. It was interesting. Unfortunately, after a little while, I realized we were back to square one with the Jimmy DLC, where it's just these arcade missions. The AI for the driving NPCs is terrible. The cops are on my ass all the time, and driving is a bitch. It's just, there was way more frustration than there was fun. And whenever I loaded up a mission, like I said, there was no voice acting, there were no cutscenes. It was just a loaded screen with text that I had to read, and then boom, you're onto the mission and you have your time limit. And like I said, that coupled with what I was already experiencing, which was the burnout, I was like, I can't do this. So, note to self: if you're like me, don't play DLC for, even if you got the DLC for free because it was part of a definitive edition or game of the year edition or whatever. Pace yourself. If you feel like you can get burnout from a game immediately after beating it because you rolled credits and subconsciously you think to yourself, well, I got it done. Don't feel like you need to force yourself through that DLC, because that's a lesson that I need to kind of relearn here. Almost over a decade since I played Oblivion, and I gave up on that DLC because I burnt myself out. And it looks like Mafia 2 was another one added to that list, which is a shame because I was ready to move on from the game, but I at least needed to know exactly how things turn out for Joe in that DLC, so I looked up the cutscenes for that and the Jimmy DLC on YouTube. The Jimmy ones, I was like, okay, that was bad. The Joe ones, however, were ones where I'm like, maybe if I wasn't burnt out, maybe if I had played this in like a month's worth of time, or a couple months worth of time, maybe I would have revisited and had much more fun than I initially had, but man, I just couldn't do it right now. But at least I had fun with the core game, and that's ultimately what matters. And it's a definitely much more polished experience than it was when it first came out, but it still has some lingering hiccups. So if you're going to play it, hopefully you're doing it on these next-gen consoles. But I'm playing on a Series X, and I still had my problems with Mafia 2 on a technical scale, so you be warned. There I am, standing in the middle of a Victoria's Secret, while my girlfriend looks through bins because there's apparently a sale. And my eyes light up. She thought I saw a girl or something in there. And I'm like, no. I'm looking at my phone. Because they unveiled that they are going to show off more gameplay and a release date for Plague Tale Requiem, one of my most anticipated sequels and games of 2022, because I really liked, damn near loved, the first one, the Plague Tale Innocence. It was, in my opinion, one of the sleeper hits of that year. I think it was like, 2018, 2019 when that first game came out. And since then, I'm like, yeah, if they're going to make a sequel, there's like so many avenues where they can kind of amplify and add more to the gameplay, add more to the story, make things dynamic, maybe make Hugo a little more likable. But outside of that, there's just so many great things about this AA game that I'm like, yes, sign me up for a sequel. So when they finally announced it, I got stoked. And then it coming to Game Pass day one, no less, I was like, yep, I'm definitely marking this on the calendar. So for Focus Entertainment to then pretty much tell us, yeah, look forward to this new gameplay, 10, 12-minute gameplay deep dive tomorrow. And this was, like I said, last week. I tuned in. Granted, I wasn't going to tune in very early in the morning. I think it was like at 6 or 7 in the morning. But as soon as I woke up, it was one of the first things that I watched on my phone and kind of jumped into the gameplay itself. The game is fucking still looking as gorgeous as ever. You can definitely tell that they refined a little bit of the visual fidelity. The gameplay was shown off at a 30 frames a second. I don't know if it was captured either on PS5 or PS4. I think I read somewhere that this was in fact captured on a PS5. Asobo Studio, I'm sorry. Focus Entertainment and Asobo Studio. Focus Entertainment is the publisher. Asobo, I believe, is the developer. And here's the thing. The game is still pristine and top-notch. The textures look better. Everything, just visual fidelity across the board looks amazing. The environment kind of changes up a little bit. It still looks kind of tied to the first game, but I noticed that it looks a little bit more canyon and catacomb heavy than it was in the first game. But as far as, like I said, the overall visual fidelity still looks like it was. It still looked like it was kept in line with the first game, but still amplified as far as technical achievements, because obviously it's come 3-4 years almost since the last game was developed. I think even before the first game came out, they started working on like concept art and stuff like that for the second game. And so here we are with this deep dive. And it showed off more of the third-person perspective, kind of dragging Hugo around, and then taking care of things stealth-wise, with Amicia using her slingshot, avoiding enemies, navigating the terrain. The biggest interesting factor here is that, without going into too much spoilers from the first game, and to try to, figure out how to maneuver around this, this gameplay dive also kind of did something interesting. It took what is essentially becoming a trope for, well, maybe not a trope, cliched mechanic for video games, which is like this echolocation type of sensory thing from like the Arkham games where he goes into detective mode where you have to like click one of the sticks, most notably like the right stick or whatever that controls the camera. You click it and it pretty much activates this little sensory mode. Oh no, Last of Us. Last of Us did the echo mode or listen mode, whatever you want to call it, where you can click it and you see it highlights the enemies, it highlights items of interest, the environment. And they bring it back again here in Plague Tale Requiem. So it's kind of been there, done that material. But what I do find kind of interesting is that they're contextualizing it. They're adding elements within the story in relation to Hugo and what went down with him at the end of the last game that makes it make sense for a stereotypical mechanic in third-person stealth games to be here. You know what I'm saying? I know it's still there, and it doesn't excuse the repetitive nature of it being used by developers, but at least the strength that Asobo was able to kind of bring into the game here is that they're contextualizing it. They're interweaving it into the story so it doesn't just feel thrown in and tacked on. Outside of that, though, the gameplay still looks pretty neat. It looks a little, it looks pretty standard fare for like a gameplay slice like this, where it feels, I don't want to say scripted, but it looks like it's being played by someone who already knows where the NPCs and the enemies are going to be. You know what I'm saying? Like, it looks like they're just kind of doing things, or they're playing on easy mode just to kind of show like, hey, this is how Amicia looks like throwing the slingshot this time. This is how she looks like in combat. This is how the enemies kind of move around, and their AI gets triggered by sounds and stuff like that. But overall, it still looks pretty good. I'm pretty sure that once you play the game, the AI could probably behave a little bit more sporadic, and everyone's going to be able to play it in a different fashion. So overall, what little gameplay that I'm seeing of here is still pretty good looking. However, we are still left with an interesting little detail that I'm curious to see play out in the story, which is that Amicia herself this time is not looking so good. Something is going on with her that it's impeding her state of mind, her way of thinking, and also just her overall physical attributions. Like her head is constantly hurting, she's weak, she's falling down. She's not looking so good. She's not looking so spicy. So it's during these moments that I think Hugo is going to have to be playable and have to be able to figure out exactly how those rat mechanics are going to come back into play and be awesome. And that's pretty much where our gameplay look kind of ends up on. It ends showing Hugo and using his abilities in a way that I don't remember seeing it done in this camera style before, with like the camera kind of zooming in and out from the perspective of the rats. And I'm like, okay, this could potentially be pretty cool. But it ends with a cliffhanger where, okay, now both Amicia and Hugo are not looking so good. Like, man, this game is just nothing but downers, nothing but people just getting sick. I mean, it is called the Plague Tale, I guess. So overall, a very, very fine hook to leave us wanting more for the game's release on October 18th, which is what the gameplay dive ends with on PS5, Xbox Series X, Xbox One, PS4, I believe it also comes out on. So it's coming out on virtually every platform, even PC, except for Switch, although I don't rule out the possibility that maybe it might be coming on a Switch Pro or some case. I don't see it coming out on the regular Switch. No, maybe the first one, but the second one, no. It's time to bring forward the Switch Pro. But that's neither here or there. What's more important is that this game, combined with an awful lot of games recently revealed, is bringing back good old Broketober back to the year calendar, because so far October is looking a little gnarly. You got Plague Tale, for those of you who are interested in it. You got Modern Warfare. You have Gotham Knights, which I'm keeping a close eye on, cautiously, very, very cautiously, considering some of the things that I've been seeing here and there. And then now we have Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope, released on October 20th. How do I know this? Because of that rather decent, actually pretty good and well-paced Nintendo Direct Mini. I finally managed to catch the Nintendo Direct Mini, which is meant to be a third-party partners kind of showcase for June 28th, 2022. This was announced like literally like the night before. So when they announced that it was going to be like around the cusp of 25 minutes long, it was going to be a mini, so nothing large scale, and they were going to be tackling mostly third-party stuff from, like, they called it the partner showcase. I was like, okay, well, obviously I'm going to instantly lower down my expectations. The the ship has kind of sailed as far as expecting some kind of E3 equivalent type of showcase or direct from Nintendo this month. So I feel like now they'll just do whatever they want, and companies will do whatever they want. I mean, technically, Nintendo's not the only one. PlayStation, in a matter of speaking, still has yet to give us like a showcase. When was the last time we had like a showcase, like that hour-long showcase where it was they revealed, what was it, Spider-Man? Wasn't it in a September? In fact, that's probably, I think we might be coming up on one. I mean, we're about to enter July here practically. Uh, I would say we're probably getting a little close to them doing some form of a showcase, because it was in September when we got the one for Marvel Spider-Man 2 and Logan both announced on the same damn thing. So I think it's a matter of time. And I think also on that horizon, we could be seeing a full-blown Nintendo Direct, like a 45-minute long Direct from Nintendo. But to kind of hold us over, we got this Direct Mini. It was actually a pretty decent mini. Now, granted, I would say you could call it, I wouldn't contest so many folks who are quick to call it more so of a JRPG Direct rather than a Direct Mini, because that was pretty much the bulk of a lot of the announcements. It started off with a lot of stuff on Monster Hunter Rise, the Sunbreak DLC, the free content DLC map. Quite an awful lot of ports were bookending pretty much the entirety of the whole thing. I mean, let's cut to the chase here. Nier Automata is now coming to the Nintendo Switch. The Persona games that were announced during the Xbox Bethesda Showcase are coming to the Nintendo Switch as well. Starting with Persona 5, just like with Game Pass. Persona 5, I think, is coming on October 21st. Persona 5 Royale, specifically. And then subsequently, we're gonna get Persona 4 Golden and Persona 3 Portable. I will be lying to say that it's not more. I'll be lying to say that it's not more appealing that a very beefy game like Persona, specifically Persona 4 Golden, which made its home on the Vita, and Persona 3 Portable, which is obviously a portable version of Persona 3 that I think came on the PSP, would be more appealing to play on the Switch than on a console like PlayStation or Xbox, because I know that the Switch can handle it, and at the same time they're catered for those portable kind of experiences to be able to play the game wherever you go, and therefore it's lengthy enough to be able to consume wherever you like. Knowing this, I think to myself, okay, so now the question is going to be, do I load up the Vita version of Persona 4 that I have, or play it on Game Pass for free on a console with refined visuals, or do I double dip and get it on the Switch so that I'm able to play it on a much more contemporary handheld? That is a legitimate question, and it looks like, they're providing options here with this Direct Mini that gave us the release, or the goal in mind that we're going to be getting those Persona games on Switch as well. So, like I said, it was mostly a lot of like little ports and things like that. A lot of JRPG stuff that I wasn't really able to retain too much in mind, except for maybe Harvestella, which kind of was like one of the second to last announcements during the Direct Mini, that I looked at and I said, okay, a couple of things about this specific game. It looks a little, I don't want to say generic, but a little samey to other JRPGs, very similar to that of, I don't want to say Monster Hunter, but there's an awful lot of that inventory management, that the food making, the monster hunting or monster fighting with the hack and slash, and you have the UI very similar to that of a Monster Hunter game, and a lot of little elements. But even if it looks a little copy and paste, if you're gonna be copying, copy from some of the better mechanics, and overall it does not look too bad. It looks pretty much like the JRPG equivalent of those Ubisoft games. That's not by Ubisoft, but it looks like a Ubisoft game because of the side questing and the camps and the stuff like that. But it's at least refined in a way where you're like, well, if I could find it for like a sale or whatever, it will probably scratch that itch of getting things done. And it doesn't come out until November 4th, so at least there's some time to think about that. Plague Tale. Okay, so Plague Tale Requiem is in fact coming to the Switch. I kind of retract my earlier statement, but it is going to be the cloud version. So you're not really playing the game on the Switch. You're streaming the game into your Switch, which is kind of debatable as to whether or not the game is genuinely on that console, in my opinion. Cloud versions of games, to me, I'm kind of like, is it though? Is it? Portal is coming to the Switch, the companion collection, which is pretty much Portal and Portal 2, which is pretty much available now. So you get what I'm saying? Like, a lot of partners just kind of bringing an awful lot of those games that were already making their ways to other consoles and now being ported over to Switch, whether it be older games like the Persona games or Nier Automata. No matter how great the games may be, it's like games that we've already seen. Minecraft Legends, games that aren't even out but are coming in other consoles. You also get a Dragon Quest spin-off, Dragon Quest Treasures. By the way, and I already posted the comment on the YouTube video, whoever mixed the audio for the Dragon Quest Treasures segment on that direct needs to get fired. I can barely hear the announcer. The announcer is talking and yet the music is just blaring. I was like, yo, what did you say? So yeah, that was a little bad. But, reminders that No Man's Sky and Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes is coming to the Switch. Live a Live, or Live Alive, I guess it's called, is coming to the Switch. Take your pre-orders now, showcasing a little bit more of that gameplay for the people who are dying to play that game. Sonic Frontiers was shown off in a better light than even Sega was able to do. It actually looked much more fun. I can't believe I'm saying this, but it looked more fun in the Direct Mini than it did by itself. Maybe it's the editing, maybe it's the choice of music, but it actually looked more dynamic and more in line with what a Sonic game is supposed to be than in its own reveals via the IGN first bullshit that they were doing. So, I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking there. But like I kind of touched on a little bit earlier, it was actually through this Direct that we got our release date confirmation of Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope, the sequel to Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle, which I personally thought was one of the bigger surprises of recent memory, where I didn't like XCOM Enemy Unknown, I wasn't gelling with that style of gameplay, and yet I fell in love with Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle. I loved that game. So I'm signed up for Sparks of Hope, and now knowing that it is coming out this year is pretty pleasant. But coming out on October, no less, October 20th. Okay, I'm gonna have to be a little selective of not only which games I'm gonna buy in October, but also which ones I'm going to play first, and which ones I can afford to kind of push off into my backlog. It was also very curious to see that the Direct Mini kind of spent a little bit of extra time on the gameplay, but not fully enough to take away from the thunder of the Ubisoft stream the following day, which unfortunately I haven't watched yet. I only have so much time to cover here on the podcast. But the little bit of gameplay, it's cool that in a sequel they're like, well, we're going to take elements of that XCOM style of gameplay from the first game, but we're not going to just copy and paste it. They're pretty much treating the gameplay, from what I'm seeing here, similarly to the way that South Park was able to kind of do the same thing but different, from the Stick of Truth to the Fractured Butthole, where it was kind of the same gameplay, but they changed up some things as far as like the grid, the turn-based stuff. It was rehauled a little bit in Fractured Butthole, and it looks like they're taking a similar approach here with Sparks of Hope. And sign me up. I just hope we don't get an awful lot more of this cringy narration that we got during the gameplay dive here in the Nintendo Direct Mini, because I could do without that. But so far from what I'm seeing in Sparks of Hope, I am actually thoroughly excited. Like I said, an awful lot of other stuff that I personally wasn't really caring for all that much. But stop everything and sign me up for the Mega Man Battle Network collection. It actually hurt a little bit to see that this is not coming out until next year. Guys, you have no idea how much I played this shit back in my Game Boy Advance days of middle school. I remember going to middle school, borrowing these games from my friends and playing these games and actually being stoked for them. The only thing that's making me a little, it's just giving me a little bit of pause is some of the textures getting that smoothening from that classic 16-bit or 16-bit kind of look to the isometric navigation style. I don't like how they smoothed out the graphics. I felt like they could have simply just left them all well enough alone. But as long as the gameplay itself is still there, that I fell in love with that those original Battle Network games could be found all in one awesome package with an awful lot of other perks such as like the music player, the artwork, all that stuff. Oh man, this is already becoming one of my must-buys in 2023, outside of already the stuff that we're excited for, all the stuff that's coming to Game Pass. Battle Network Collection, oh my god, you guys have no idea how much I played this shit back when I was a kid. So to see that coming out of the Direct Mini, I'm like, alright, yes, this combined with, like I said, a look at Harvestella, closer look at the Persona series, and then a gameplay deep dive and a release date of Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope. This was a pretty solid Nintendo Direct Mini, I'm not gonna lie. Like I said, some stuff in between here and there looked kind of neat and interesting, but they're very indie games. They're very, third-party indie stuff that I looked at and said, that's cool, but I'm not, signed up for. And then on the other side, you're also gonna have your necessary ports to give the Switch some double dippage in there, like Nier Automata, and again, the Persona series, and then some stuff coming over to the States, like Live a Live. So overall, a solid little indie partner showcase, or mini partner showcase. It is still, however, kind of nuts that this, combined with the Plague Tale Requiem look earlier in the week, gave us release dates for those games, and we still have nothing on God of War Ragnarok. Yeah, little by little, I'm starting to believe that's not coming out this year. Anyways, guys, that about does it for me in this week's episode of the DarkspiderCast. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you guys want to stay in touch, you guys know where to find me. Twitter, Instagram, at DarkspiderDavid, all one word. You can literally find it also in the description of this podcast, whether you're listening to on your favorite podcast platform or on the YouTube channel page. You can find the Anchor FM link, as well as being able to find the niche channel, the official main Dark Spider David channel, as well as the website links. You guys can all find that there. Otherwise, guys, thank you so much for listening, and until next week, stay humble.